Raymond Foster's hands were still dusty from fixing his neighbor's broken fence when she handed him her business card. The young woman had watched him work for 3 hours, measuring angles twice, reinforcing corners that didn't need it, calculating weight distribution like he was designing a bridge, not repairing wood slats. She'd asked quiet questions about his technique, his past, why someone with an engineer's precision was doing handyman work on a Saturday afternoon. He'd brushed it off, said he just liked things done right. But when he glanced at the card in his truck, Allison Reed, Chief Executive Officer, Reed Enterprises, his hands froze on the steering wheel. He didn't know Reed Enterprises owned 15 commercial buildings downtown. He didn't know his simple act of neighborly kindness had just put him in front of the woman who controlled half the town's real estate. And he had no idea that 1 week later, this woman would make him an offer that forced him to face the hardest choice of his life. Hold on to the safe life he'd built for his son or awaken the dream he'd buried with his grief 3 years ago. What came next would force him to answer the question he'd been avoiding for 3 years. Could a single father find the courage to believe in himself again? The morning had started like any other Saturday. Raymond woke at 6:30, his internal clock reliably prompting him. His morning ritual always began with preparing scrambled eggs and toast for Caleb, his 7-year-old son. Sunlight streamed gently through their small kitchen window. Caleb ate slowly, his tiny fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on his glass of orange juice. He looked up at his father with serious brown eyes, a gaze that tightened Raymond's chest with love and immense responsibility. The dual weight of being both mother and father pressed upon him each morning, a burden he willingly carried. After breakfast, Raymond drove Caleb to his friend Leon's house for a playdate. The boy chattered enthusiastically about school, recounting the intricate tower he was constructing with blocks, and proudly sharing that his teacher, Miss Beatrice, had complimented his math skills. Raymond listened, his attention split between the road and his son's animated voice. These were the moments he now lived for, the ordinary ones, the safe ones, the quiet anchors in a life that had once been severely shaken. 3 years ago, he had learned how swiftly the ordinary could shatter. A single moment of inattention on a rainy highway had irrevocably taken his wife Amanda from him. He had been sketching elevation drawings for a downtown high-rise when the devastating call came. The career he had spent 8 dedicated years building suddenly held no meaning compared to the terrified little boy who needed him. So Raymond had walked away from architecture, from the blueprints and the accolades that had once defined him. He had taken a job as a building maintenance worker, trading complex structural analyses for routine tasks. The pay was less than half what he had earned as an architect, but the hours were rigidly predictable. He could drop Caleb at school, work his shift, and be home for dinner every single night. On weekends, he performed odd jobs around the neighborhood. It was not the ambitious career he had once envisioned, but it was enough. It had to be enough. He repeated this phrase often, a protective mantra against the persistent ache of unfulfilled dreams. That afternoon, driving back from Caleb's playdate, Raymond noticed the fence. It marked the property line of his new neighbor, and last night's storm had toppled a section of weathered boards. The young woman who resided there stood on her porch observing the damage with her arms crossed. Raymond had seen her occasionally, a quiet figure. She kept to herself, driving a modest sedan and dressing in simple jeans and sweaters. She had moved in 2 months prior and rarely conversed with anyone on the block. Other neighbors speculated she might be unemployed or working from home. No one truly knew her circumstances. Raymond pulled his truck over instinctively. It was a natural act of neighborliness in their small community. He retrieved his toolbox and walked across her lawn, noting the grass needed mowing and the gutters could use cleaning. She turned as he approached, surprise flickering across her features. She appeared younger than he had estimated, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp, observant eyes. He introduced himself, offering to mend the fence. She hesitated, then accepted with quiet gratitude. "My name is Allison," she stated. "Just Allison." Raymond set to work removing damaged boards and measuring gaps with the same precision he once applied to designing load-bearing walls. His hands moved automatically, guided by years of training. He reinforced posts, adding diagonal bracing that, while not strictly necessary, would ensure the fence's resilience. His mind inherently sought to improve the original design. Allison brought him lemonade after an hour. She stood at a careful distance watching his hands. Her gaze was analytical, scrutinizing not just the task, but Raymond himself. She questioned his technique, asking why he reinforced corners and how he calculated stress points. Her inquiries were specific, informed, suggesting a deep understanding of structural engineering. Raymond deflected with humor and vague answers. He no longer discussed his past, the designs that had won state awards, the career he had abandoned. That life, he felt, belonged to a different person. Now he was merely a handyman, a single father, providing stability for his son. That was enough. It had to be enough. He repeated this phrase often, a mantra against unfulfilled dreams. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the fence stood straight and strong, a testament to Raymond's meticulous effort. He gathered his tools, declining payment with a dismissive wave. Allison disappeared briefly into her house, returning with a business card. "Take it anyway," she insisted softly, "in case you ever need anything." He quickly glanced at it, offered his thanks, and then left. It was not until he was seated in his truck, Caleb safely buckled beside him, that Raymond truly examined the card. The words printed on it struck him with the force of cold water. Allison Reed, Chief Executive Officer, Reed Enterprises. His hands froze on the steering wheel. Reed Enterprises. He recognized the name immediately. Everyone in town did. They owned the imposing Morrison Building downtown, the expansive Riverside office complex, and the new commercial development on 5th Street. They were without question the largest real estate company in the entire county, and he had just spent 3 hours repairing a fence for their CEO, treating her as if she were any other neighbor requiring assistance. The realization caused his stomach to churn with an emotion he struggled to identify. Perhaps embarrassment or the unsettling feeling of having been thoroughly evaluated without his awareness. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Raymond sat at his kitchen table with his laptop. He searched diligently for Reed Enterprises, scrolling through commercial listings and development projects. The company owned 15 major buildings downtown. Their portfolio was valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, and Allison Reed, at just 29 years old, managed all of it. Articles lauded her as a prodigy, a visionary, who had transformed her father's small construction company into a real estate empire. Yet she resided in a modest house in a working-class neighborhood, drove a car that was 5 years old, and had stood on her porch in jeans, watching a storm knock down her fence. Raymond closed the laptop and stared at the business card. She had watched him work with analytical eyes, asking questions that probed beyond surface competence. Why? What could a CEO worth millions want with a handyman who was in a former life an architect? The question pursued him into a restless sleep. He woke Sunday morning with no answers, only a growing sense that something in his carefully controlled life was about to shift irrevocably. The call came on Monday afternoon. Raymond was replacing a water heater in Building C of the Riverside Apartments when his phone rang. Allison's voice on the other end was professional, direct. Reed Enterprises, she explained, was renovating an old office building downtown. They needed someone to consult on the project. Would he be interested in taking a look? Just a consultation, she emphasized. She would, of course, pay him for his time with no commitment required beyond that initial meeting. Raymond's first instinct was to refuse. He no longer did consultations. That life belonged to a different man. He fixed broken pipes, electrical outlets, hinges. He didn't design towering buildings anymore. He had willingly traded those aspirations for the quiet reliability of routine maintenance. But something in her voice, a subtle undercurrent of sincere professionalism, stopped him before he could utter a refusal. It wasn't pity, he noted, nor was it the veiled charity he had sometimes encountered in the past. It was simply a straightforward, legitimate business proposition, presented with an undeniable confidence that resonated with a part of him he thought was long dormant. And the truth was, he desperately needed the money. Caleb's school was organizing a highly anticipated field trip to the Science Museum next month, an educational adventure that Caleb had been eagerly discussing for weeks, and the cost associated with it was more than Raymond had prudently budgeted for. It was a small, practical detail, but it carried significant weight in his carefully balanced world. So against his better judgment, against the cautious voice of fear within him, he heard himself say, "Yes, just a consultation, just this once." The words once spoken felt both liberating and terrifying. Wednesday afternoon found Raymond standing in front of Reed Enterprises headquarters, a modern edifice of gleaming glass and polished steel, 12 stories of commercial success rising majestically above the historic downtown district. As he gazed up at its imposing facade, he felt his past a lifetime. He had meticulously tried to compartmentalize rushing back with an almost physical force. Inside the lobby gleamed with imported marble and carefully curated contemporary art, a world away from the utilitarian spaces he now inhabited. The receptionist knew his name, directing him with practiced courtesy to the 11th floor. The elevator ride felt like a slow, deliberate ascent into a different world entirely, one he had consciously left behind. Allison met him directly at the elevator doors, transformed from the casual neighbor into a commanding chief executive officer, impeccably dressed in tailored business attire. Yet her eyes were the same sharp, evaluating, seeing far more than most people bothered to look for. She led him through a bustling open office space. Raymond felt acutely out of place in his worn work boots and simple button-down shirt, clutching a folder containing a few rough sketches he had hastily thrown together the night before. This, he thought, was a profound mistake. Then Allison led him to the Morrison Building, and everything changed irrevocably. The structure itself was a magnificent relic from the 1960s, 6 stories of solid concrete and sturdy brick that had stood vacant for 5 long years. But Raymond, with the trained eye of a true architect, saw past the grime and neglect to the inherent strength of its underlying bones. The building, he instinctively knew, possessed character, history, and an undeniable untapped potential. As Allison explained their ambitious vision to convert it into modern office space while meticulously preserving its architectural heritage, his mind, long dormant in this capacity, was already racing. He walked through the empty, echoing floors, his fingers trailing along load-bearing walls, his eyes calculating ceiling heights and natural light angles. This building, he realized, didn't need to be torn down. It needed someone who truly understood its intrinsic value. Without a conscious thought, Raymond started talking, words pouring out. He described how they could strategically remove interior walls for open floor plans, integrate skylights, spoke passionately about green roofs and solar panels, and preserving the facade while modernizing behind it. 3 years of suppressed passion were suddenly breaking through like water bursting from a long cracked dam. He forgot about being a maintenance worker. He was purely and unequivocally an architect again, seeing elegant solutions. When he finally stopped talking, Allison was smiling. She asked highly technical questions that proved she grasped the intricate details. For 30 exhilarating minutes, Raymond forgot everything except the pure joy of designing. Then reality asserted itself. He was a single father with a 7-year-old son who needed him home for dinner. Allison walked him back to the building entrance. Before he could make his polite goodbyes, she delivered her offer, her voice even and clear. She was offering him the position of lead architect for the Morrison Building renovation. The terms, she explained, were designed with flexibility, a part-time schedule, flexible hours, with the option to work from home whenever possible. She promised, even adjust the project timeline to seamlessly accommodate his unique needs and responsibilities. The salary she named casually yet precisely was more than he had earned in 2 full years of laborious maintenance work. Raymond's hands went cold. This was clearly not just a consultation. This was a bona fide job offer, a real one, the kind that possessed the undeniable power to change everything he had carefully constructed and accepted. He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why? Why me? Why now? Why someone who hasn't designed anything in 3 years? Allison's answer was disarmingly simple yet profound in its impact. She had watched him meticulously redesign her fence, not just repairing it, but enhancing it to withstand the theoretical force of hurricane winds. Anyone, she stated with absolute conviction, who cared that much about the intricate details on a free favor would undeniably bring that same unwavering dedication and commitment to a multi-million-dollar architectural project. She believed, truly believed in his innate talent. She wanted him, specifically him, on her team. The words struck Raymond harder than he had expected. No one, he realized with a pang of sorrow, had truly believed in him in his professional capabilities for a very long time. He had, in fact, stopped believing in himself, allowing the weight of grief and responsibility to bury his former ambitions. But belief, he knew, wasn't enough. Raymond carried immense responsibilities. He had a beloved son, Caleb, who needed stability above all else, not a father foolishly chasing a resurrected dream that might ultimately fail and jeopardize their carefully maintained life. He thanked Allison, politely expressing his gratitude for the offer, and said he would think about it. Then he drove home, picked up Caleb from after-school care, and tried with every fiber of his being to pretend his hands weren't shaking from the seismic shift this conversation had brought. That night, Caleb, with the innocent perceptiveness of a child, asked his father if he was okay. Raymond, with a heavy heart, said yes. But the lie tasted undeniably bitter on his tongue. He wasn't okay. He was in truth terrified. Terrified of hoping again, of trying again, of potentially failing in a way that would wound him most deeply, affecting not just himself, but the small, precious world he had built around his son. The decision kept him awake for 3 agonizing nights. Every rational argument screamed no. He possessed a stable job, a predictable income, a life that, while modest, undeniably worked for him and Caleb. Architecture, he remembered, meant long, grueling hours, crushing deadlines, and a pervasive stress that invariably followed him home. It meant risking becoming the very person who had been too narrowly focused on his work to truly notice that his wife Amanda desperately needed him to slow down. But another voice, a faint, persistent whisper, emerged from beneath the paralyzing fear. It asked what profound lesson he was unwittingly teaching Caleb by choosing to perpetually play it safe. It gently reminded him that his wife had cherished his passion for design, had consistently encouraged him to dream bigger, to reach higher. It cautiously suggested that maybe, just maybe, he could indeed be both a good, devoted father and a creatively fulfilled person. On Thursday afternoon, Raymond, his voice trembling slightly with the weight of his resolve, finally called Allison. He accepted her offer, but with one crucial condition, a 3-month trial period. If within that time it simply didn't work out, if he found himself utterly unable to balance the demands of both worlds, they would, he stipulated, part ways professionally, without animosity. Allison, without a moment's hesitation, agreed immediately. "Welcome to Reed Enterprises," she said, her voice warm and genuinely welcoming. Raymond hung up the phone and sat in his truck for 10 full minutes, profoundly wondering if he had just made the very best or the very worst decision of his entire life. Caleb's excited reaction that evening, a jubilant, "My daddy's an architect again," enthusiastically suggested it might indeed be the former. The very next Monday, Raymond attended his first board meeting. Allison introduced him to 5 senior executives who would oversee the Morrison Building project. Their collective faces ranged from thinly veiled skepticism to outright hostility. Philip Henderson, the chief financial officer, immediately questioned Raymond's credentials with a pointed, almost accusatory tone. 3 years out of practice, he noted no recent projects of note and hired through a highly unusual personal connection rather than competitive bidding. The uncomfortable implications hung heavy and palpable in the boardroom air. Corbin Blackwell, the chief operating officer, wondered aloud if Reed Enterprises could truly afford to gamble millions of dollars on what he dismissively termed sentiment. Adelaide Price, the head of development, coldly suggested they were taking entirely unnecessary risks. Allison's response to the board's skepticism was firm and unequivocal. Raymond's portfolio, from before she asserted with unwavering conviction, spoke powerfully for itself. 2 prestigious state architecture awards, successful projects spanning 3 counties' talent, she proclaimed, did not simply disappear just because someone had taken time away from their career. She believed profoundly in giving second chances to people who truly deserved them, and she believed Raymond was one such person. But the board's collective message was clear and chillingly unambiguous. They would be watching him closely, scrutinizing his every move. Any mistake, any unforeseen delay, and Raymond would be gone, dismissed without a second thought. He left that meeting understanding with absolute clarity that he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. Allison had boldly put her own professional credibility directly on the line for him. He couldn't, under any circumstances, let her down. The first month proved even harder than Raymond had painstakingly imagined. He set up a makeshift home office in his spare bedroom, meticulously working after Caleb had fallen asleep and diligently resuming before his son woke up, sacrificing precious hours of rest. The development team, a unified front of subtle resistance, seemed utterly determined to make his integration into the project as difficult as possible. He encountered delayed responses to his urgent requests, frustratingly vague answers to crucial technical questions, and inconvenient, almost deliberately obstructive scheduling for vital site visits. These were small, seemingly insignificant frustrations, yet they accumulated, adding up to a clear, undeniable message they simply didn't want him there. Raymond responded by working even harder, relentlessly double-checking every single calculation, meticulously perfecting every minute detail until his eyes burned with an almost unbearable exhaustion. His preliminary design presentation was scheduled for 3 weeks after he started. Raymond practiced his pitch a dozen times, refining every slide and rendering until they were absolutely flawless. The night before, he barely slept, his mind racing with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The next morning, he drove to Reed Enterprises with his carefully prepared portfolio and a stomach churning with profound anxiety. The boardroom was an intimidating space, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling downtown, a massive conference table where 5 executives sat with crossed arms and perpetually skeptical expressions. Only Allison looked genuinely encouraging. Raymond presented his vision for the Morrison Building, a project he passionately termed Heritage Reimagined. He articulated his plan to preserve the building's unique character while seamlessly transforming it for modern use. He spoke of a green roof adorned with native plants, solar panel arrays, a beautifully restored brick facade, and open interior spaces flooded with natural light. He projected energy costs would drop by 30%, asserting that the building would become a leading model for sustainable renovation. He spoke for 20 compelling minutes, his passion overriding his innate nervousness, and when he finished, the room descended into an absolute chilling silence. Corbin Blackwell broke the quiet, first his voice dismissive. "Too ambitious," he declared. The proposed green roof, he pointed out, added significant, perhaps unwarranted expense. Philip Henderson questioned whether investors truly desired restoration or contemporary design, arguing they expected sleek and new, not old bones retrofitted with modern plumbing. Adelaide Price worried openly about the timeline, challenging whether Raymond could realistically deliver on such complex specifications within the given time frame. Only Allison defended the proposal, arguing with conviction that the design meticulously honored the building's rich history, while simultaneously meeting every modern need. The board, unmoved, voted 4-1 to request significant revisions. Raymond left, feeling as though he had been physically punched in the gut, his dreams momentarily shattered. Allison caught Raymond in the parking garage, her expression serious but determined. "Don't change the core concept," she urged. Just refine the presentation. Add a thorough cost-benefit analysis. Show them the undeniable numbers, Raymond. He wanted desperately to believe her, but a persistent shadow of doubt was creeping into his mind. Perhaps the board was right. Perhaps he was thinking too much like an artist and not enough like a shrewd businessman. Maybe he had been away from the architectural world for too long. Allison seemed to instinctively read his thoughts. The best architecture, she stated with conviction, is always both art and business. Don't lose what makes your work truly special just to please people who are fundamentally scared of vision. Raymond spent 2 more arduous weeks meticulously refining his proposal. He added detailed financial projections, strategic market comparisons, and comprehensive sustainability, return on investment calculations. The meticulously gathered numbers unequivocally supported everything he had claimed. He practiced his presentation relentlessly, anticipating every conceivable objection until every word felt natural, every transition flawlessly smooth. The crucial second board meeting was now scheduled for Friday morning. Raymond was ready. Then, Thursday afternoon, his phone rang. It was the school nurse. Caleb had developed a high fever and was asking specifically for him. Raymond's heart instantly seized with a familiar terror. He checked his watch. The pivotal board meeting was just 18 hours away, the culmination of 5 grueling weeks' work. But the choice, he realized with an absolute clarity that cut through his panic, wasn't really a choice at all. He immediately called Allison, his voice tight with urgency, telling her he absolutely had to go. She didn't hesitate for a second. "Go," she commanded, her voice firm with understanding. "Family first. I'll handle the board." Raymond drove to the school, his hands gripped tight on the steering wheel, a profound sense of professional disaster and parental crisis colliding violently in his chest. Caleb was burning up his small body, shaking uncontrollably with chills. The doctor at the hospital swiftly diagnosed pneumonia, admitting him overnight for observation. Raymond sat vigil beside the hospital bed, holding his son's hot, feverish hand, watching the clear intravenous fluids drip steadily into tiny veins. Nothing else mattered. Not the looming board meeting, not his fragile second chance at a career, just this boy. This precious child who depended on him for absolutely everything. If that meant losing the Morrison Building project, so be it. He had made his choice 3 years ago, and he would make it again every single time without question. Back at Reed Enterprises, Allison stood alone in the imposing boardroom facing the merciless executives. Philip Henderson moved to terminate Raymond's contract, immediately declaring him unreliable for not showing up to defend his own work. Adelaide Price seconded the motion. Corbin Blackwell looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Allison, her resolve unwavering, refused their demands. Philip Henderson, however, cited company bylaws. A unanimous board vote could override chief executive officer hiring decisions on contracts over 6 figures. He delivered an ultimatum. Fire Raymond Foster, or they would call an emergency shareholder meeting to vote on her leadership threatening her own position. Allison didn't flinch. She displayed Raymond's design on the large screen, meticulously walking through every detail he had so carefully prepared. "This isn't just a renovation," she stated with powerful conviction. "It's a vision for what downtown could truly become. This man possesses more talent in his drafting hand than most architects develop in their entire careers." The board, however, remained unmoved. Raymond Foster, she continued, was a father first and an architect second. That Allison declared, her voice ringing with authority, is precisely why I hired him, because he understands priorities, because he knows what actually matters. If you vote him out, you will have to vote me out too. I will not lead a company that cannot recognize real talent when it is sitting right in front of them. The tension in that room was so thick it could have cut glass. Corbin Blackwell shifted uncomfortably, remembering Allison's father, a respected architect, and how he had watched her build this company from almost nothing. He cast his vote to give Raymond one more chance. Adelaide Price reluctantly agreed. One final presentation she stipulated 1 week from Friday. No excuses. If he failed, both Raymond and Allison were done. Philip Henderson offered a cold, satisfied smile. When this project inevitably collapsed, he would finally have the leverage he needed to push Allison out and seize control himself. Allison gathered her things and left without another word. She drove straight to the hospital. Raymond was slumped in a chair beside Caleb's hospital bed when Allison arrived. Surprise and a profound sense of guilt immediately crossed his face. He began to apologize profusely before she even sat down. Allison cut him off gently but firmly. She told him about the board meeting, about the difficult ultimatum, and about the one final chance they now had. Raymond's face went pale. "Your entire career is on the line because of me," he whispered, his voice filled with anguish. "You should fire me. You should protect yourself." Allison looked at the sleeping Caleb, then back at Raymond, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not firing you," she said quietly, her words imbued with a deep understanding. "I'm fighting for you, because someone once gave up fighting for themselves, and I watched them regret it for the rest of their life." Then for the first time she told him about her own father. He too had been an architect immensely talented and passionately devoted to sustainable design long before it was fashionable. When Allison's mother had fallen gravely ill, he had unhesitatingly left his firm to care for her, spending 10 years as her full-time caregiver, watching his prodigious skills grow rusty, his valuable contacts fade away. After her passing, he had desperately tried to return to his profession, but he was considered too old, too outdated. The architecture world had cruelly moved on without him. He had built Reed Enterprises as a construction company, instead always wondering with a profound sense of loss what might have been. His biggest regret, Allison revealed, wasn't leaving architecture, but believing he couldn't do both, believing he had to choose. "When I saw you fixing that fence," Allison said, her voice soft with revelation, "I saw my father, someone with real talent, doing work beneath their capability because life had knocked them down. I thought perhaps I could help someone achieve the second chance he never received." Raymond felt tears burning behind his eyes. He had spent 3 agonizing years convinced he had to sacrifice his profound dreams for his son's well-being. Now this remarkable woman was telling him that the sacrifice itself might have been the entirely wrong lesson to teach Caleb. Perhaps Caleb needed to witness his father passionately pursue his dreams, not surrender to overwhelming fear. Perhaps being fully alive, truly engaged in his passion would make him a better father, not a worse one. 3 days later, Caleb was released from the hospital. The antibiotics had worked. Color had returned to his cheeks and light shone once again in his eyes. Raymond took him home, profoundly grateful for modern medicine and for second chances. Caleb, with his innate curiosity, asked about the big building project. Raymond, with newfound honesty, admitted he was scared. Scared of failing, scared of proving the doubters right, scared of letting down the one person who now believed in him. Caleb's response was disarmingly simple yet profound. "Mommy used to say," the 7-year-old explained, his voice clear, "brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and doing it anyway." 7 years old, and his son was already wiser than he was. That night, Raymond pulled out his Morrison building designs. For weeks, he had been trying to prove something to the board, to himself, to everyone who doubted his worth. Now he stopped trying to prove anything. He designed solely for the building itself, for what it could become, for the pure, unadulterated joy of creating something beautiful and meaningful. The hours flew past. When dawn finally broke, Raymond had completely reimagined his approach, not making it different, but making it undeniably better, clearer, and infused with unwavering confidence. He wasn't an architect desperately trying to reclaim a lost career. He was simply an architect doing what he was profoundly meant to do. The week passed in a relentless blur of refinement and preparation. Raymond hired a rendering company to create stunning visualizations of his redesigned concepts. He meticulously built a physical model that precisely demonstrated how the building would transform. He practiced his presentation until every word felt natural, every transition flawlessly smooth. The night before the final board meeting, he kissed Caleb goodnight and felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 long years: excitement instead of paralyzing fear. Win or lose, he was doing this right. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. Raymond, dressed in his best suit, loaded his materials into his truck and drove downtown. The Reed Enterprises building looked different today, not intimidating, just tall. The elevator ride to the 11th floor felt quick. Inside the boardroom, more people waited than before: board members, city council representatives, and potential investors. This was not just a project review. This was a public proving ground. Raymond set up his presentation, connected his laptop, took a deep breath, and began. He did not start with statistics or budgets. He started with the story of the Morrison Building, built in 1962 by a local businessman who believed downtown could thrive. It had weathered decades of economic ups and downs, stood empty for 5 years, while the city forgot its value until now. "This building deserves ambition," Raymond declared. "It deserves someone who sees not what it is, but what it could become." Then he showed them. The renderings took their breath. The original brick facade cleaned and restored. Green roof gardens visible from the street. Interior spaces transformed into light-filled collaboration zones. He detailed the technical specifications, the energy efficiency calculations, the financial projections. This building would achieve LEED Platinum certification. It would reduce the urban heat island effect. It would become a landmark that made people proud of their city. The cost was higher than traditional renovation, yes, but the value was immeasurable. The room was absolutely silent when he finished. Raymond's hands were steady. His voice was strong. He had laid everything on the table: his vision, his passion, his soul. Now it was up to them. The city council representative stood first. "This is exactly what downtown needs," she said. "A building that honors our past while embracing our future." The lead investor nodded agreement. "The financial projections are solid. The environmental benefits add significant value. We're in." Corbin Blackwell cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Foster. I was wrong about you. This work is exceptional." Adelaide Price added her agreement. This design could win national awards. Even Philip Henderson, who had fought hardest against him, had to concede. "It's good work. Very good work." Allison said nothing, just smiled at Raymond with quiet pride. The vote was unanimous. Project approved. Raymond Foster was officially lead architect of the Morrison Building renovation. He had done it. Against all odds, against all doubts, he had proven he still had what it took. The weeks that followed blurred together in the best possible way. Raymond was officially appointed chief architect with a full salary, benefits, and a small team assigned to help him. The hostile resistance from the development team evaporated overnight. Adelaide Price personally apologized for her initial skepticism. Corbin Blackwell invited him to lunch to discuss future projects. Even Philip Henderson was cordially professional. Raymond had earned his place through undeniable competence, and the company's culture shifted to accommodate him. More importantly, Raymond figured out how to balance both worlds. He developed a routine. Mornings at Reed Enterprises, collaborating with engineers and contractors, making site visits and reviewing progress. Afternoons were for Caleb pickup from school homework, help dinner together. Evenings, after his son was asleep, Raymond would refine designs and prepare for the next day. Weekends were family time, sacred and protected. It wasn't easy, but it was working. He was present for his son and present for his work. He didn't have to choose. Caleb's pride was almost tangible. At school, he told everyone his daddy was designing the big building downtown. His teacher mentioned how much Caleb's confidence had grown. Raymond realized something profound. By pursuing his own dreams, he was teaching his son that dreams mattered, that fear shouldn't stop you, that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. The lesson was worth more than any salary. 6 months passed in intense, rewarding work. The Morrison building transformation exceeded everyone's expectations. The green roof became a downtown attraction before construction even finished. Local news covered the sustainable features. Architecture magazines requested interviews. The building was becoming exactly what Raymond had envisioned, a landmark that proved old structures could be reimagined for modern needs without sacrificing their soul. Every day on the construction site felt like vindication. The grand opening arrived on a perfect Saturday in late spring. Downtown streets were closed for the celebration. City officials, business leaders, press, and curious community members gathered outside the Morrison building. The structure gleamed in the sunshine, original brick facade restored to its former glory. Modern glass additions reflected the sky. The green roof was visible from the street like a crown of living plants. It was beautiful. It was everything Raymond had promised. The mayor spoke first, praising Reed Enterprises for investing in downtown revitalization. Allison gave a brief speech about sustainable development and historic preservation. Then she introduced Raymond. He stepped to the microphone with Caleb standing in the front row. For a moment he couldn't speak, emotion choking his throat. 6 months ago he had been a maintenance worker, convinced his best years were behind him. Now he stood before hundreds of people, honored for designing something that would outlast him. He found his voice. 6 months ago, Raymond began, I thought my career was over. I'd given up architecture to be a father, and I believed that was the only choice I had. Raymond looked down at Caleb. But my son taught me something important. You don't have to choose between who you are and who you need to be. He shifted his gaze to Allison. Someone believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. She saw potential I'd forgotten I had. This building isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who took a chance on second acts and unlikely comebacks. He concluded with words aimed at anyone listening who might need them. To everyone out there who thinks it's too late to try again, it's not. Your story isn't over until you decide it is. Circumstances might knock you down. Fear might make you play it safe. But talent doesn't expire. Dreams don't have deadlines. You just need one person to believe in you first, and then you have to believe in yourself. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. Raymond felt 3 years of grief and doubt finally release their grip on his chest. The State Architecture Council representative presented an award, the Sustainable Design Excellence Award for Outstanding Achievement in Historic Renovation and Environmental Innovation. Raymond accepted the plaque, shook hands, smiled for photos, but his eyes kept returning to Caleb, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Later, after the formal ceremony ended, Raymond and his son took the elevator to the building's roof garden. They stood among the native plants and solar panels, the city spreading out below them. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, then spoke. Mommy would love this, Daddy. It's so pretty. Raymond knelt beside his son, eye level. I think she would too, buddy. I think she'd be happy that we're happy. It was the first time in 3 years he had mentioned his wife without the words catching in his throat. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but alongside it now was peace, acceptance, the understanding that honoring her memory meant living fully, not hiding from life. Caleb asked why Miss Allison had believed in him. Raymond thought about it. Because she saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there. Like when you're sad and I remind you that you're brave. His son's face lit with understanding. Then I'm glad she fixed our fence. Raymond laughed. Actually, buddy, I fixed her fence. Caleb shook his head with 7-year-old wisdom. No, Daddy. She fixed yours. The metaphor was lost on the child, but Raymond understood perfectly. That fence had been the bridge between his old life and new one. A simple act of neighborly kindness that had changed everything. That evening, Raymond and Caleb visited Allison at her house. The fence still stood strong and straight, a testament to over-engineering and attention to detail. Raymond touched the wood, remembering the afternoon he'd spent rebuilding it. "Where everything changed," he said quietly. Allison joined them in the yard. "Just a fence," she replied. "You did the hard part." Raymond disagreed. "You opened the door. I just had the courage to walk through it." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where both their lives had transformed. 2 months after the Morrison building opening, Raymond sat in his office at Reed Enterprises on a Monday morning. His office, he still marveled at that. The space had his name on the door, a drafting table by the window, and shelves filling with architecture books and models. A knock interrupted his thoughts. A young woman entered, nervous energy radiating from her posture. She was there for the junior architect interview. Raymond glanced at her resume, and his chest tightened with recognition. A 3-year gap in her employment history. The explanation was brief family caregiving responsibilities. He asked her to tell him about her design philosophy. Her entire demeanor changed. She lit up, discussing sustainable architecture, adaptive reuse of historic buildings, the responsibility architects had to create spaces that improved lives. Raymond saw himself in her passion, in her fear that the gap made her worthless, in her desperate hope for a second chance. He asked when she could start. Her shock was visible. Just like that, she asked. Just like that, he confirmed. Everyone deserves someone who believes in them. Welcome to the team. After she left, Raymond checked his email. A message from an architecture student caught his attention. The subject line read, "Request for advice." The student explained she was a single parent considering dropping out of school. The demands were too much, the self-doubt too heavy. But she had read about Raymond's story in a magazine article. His success gave her hope. Did he have any advice? Raymond stared at the screen for a long moment, then began typing. "Don't give up. Your circumstances don't define your potential. They shape your perspective, which can actually make you a better designer. Find one person who believes in you, a professor, a mentor, a friend. Then prove them right. And if you can't find that person, start by believing in yourself." I spent 3 years convinced I had to choose between being a good parent and having a career I loved. I was wrong. You can be both. It's not easy, but it's possible. Take it from someone who almost gave up and is grateful every day that someone wouldn't let him. Raymond read the message twice, then sent it. If his story could help even one person, everything he'd been through was worth it. Friday afternoon arrived with sunshine and the promise of a weekend. Raymond finished reviewing contractor reports, approved payment schedules, and saved his designs for Monday. At 3:30, he packed his bag and drove to Caleb's school. His son burst out of the classroom with his usual energy, talking nonstop about his day. They drove past the Morrison building, now fully occupied and thriving. Caleb pointed. "That's our building, Daddy." Raymond smiled but corrected him gently. "That's everyone's building, buddy. We just helped it become what it was meant to be." They drove home through their neighborhood past Allison's house with its perfectly maintained fence. Raymond thought about the chain of events that had started there. A storm, a fallen fence, a simple act of neighborly kindness. None of it had been planned. He hadn't set out to reclaim his career or prove anything to anyone. He'd just been trying to help. And somehow that small choice had opened a door he'd thought was closed forever. Life was strange that way. The moments that changed everything often looked ordinary when they were happening. At home, Raymond made dinner while Caleb did homework at the kitchen table. They ate together, talking about school and friends and the science project due next month. After dishes, they played a board game, then read together before bed. Raymond tucked his son in, kissed his forehead, and stood in the doorway, watching him fall asleep. This was what mattered. This small person who trusted him completely. Everything else, the career, the awards, the recognition was wonderful, but secondary. He was a father first. He'd never forget that again. But being a father first didn't mean being only a father. That was the lesson Allison had taught him. The truth Caleb had helped him understand. He could be devoted to his son and still pursue the work that made him feel alive. The two weren't mutually exclusive. They were complementary. Being fulfilled in his career made him more present as a parent. Having Caleb as his priority kept his career ambitions grounded in what truly mattered. The balance was delicate, but it was real. Later that night, Raymond sat at his home drafting table with blueprints spread before him. A new project, smaller than the Morrison building, but equally important, renovating the old community center where Caleb played basketball. The building was crumbling. The city had no budget. But Raymond was donating his design work. He sketched new layouts, energy-efficient systems, spaces that would serve the neighborhood for generations. His pencil moved across the paper with practiced confidence. This was who he was. Not a maintenance worker pretending, but an architect, a father, a man who'd learned that the worst moments of life didn't have to define the rest of it. The Morrison building stood downtown like a beacon visible through Raymond's window. Lights glowed in the windows where companies worked late, where careers were being built and lives were being lived. That building would be his legacy, the thing he'd created that would outlast him. But his real legacy was sleeping down the hall, a boy who'd learned that fear wasn't stronger than courage, that setbacks weren't the same as endings, that his father's love was constant, even when life was uncertain. Raymond thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. Grief-stricken, lost, convinced the best parts of himself had died with his wife. That man had been wrong. The best parts hadn't died. They'd just been sleeping, waiting for someone to believe they could wake up again. Allison Reed had been that someone. She'd seen past his circumstances to his potential, had risked her own career to give him a chance, had refused to accept his surrender to mediocrity, and in doing so, she'd given him back to himself. The business card she'd handed him that Saturday afternoon still sat on his desk, worn now from being carried in his wallet for months. Allison Reed, Chief Executive Officer, Reed Enterprises. Raymond picked it up, remembering the shock he'd felt when he'd first really read it. He'd been so focused on the title that he'd missed what mattered, not what she was, but who she was. A person who'd lost someone, too. A person who understood regret. A person who decided to use her power to create chances for people who needed them. She'd saved him. And now, hiring that young woman with the employment gap, answering that student's email, he was learning to pay it forward. The fence, it always came back to the fence. Raymond had rebuilt it to help a neighbor. Allison had watched to evaluate an architect. The structure stood between their houses, a boundary that had become a bridge, repairs that had become a revelation. Raymond had gone there with a toolbox and good intentions. He'd left with a business card that would change his life. Such a small thing, such enormous consequences. It reminded him that you never really knew which moments mattered until they were behind you. Every choice contained infinite possibilities. The clock showed nearly midnight. Raymond should sleep. Tomorrow was Saturday, and Caleb wanted to go to the park, but he stayed at his drafting table a while longer, pencil moving across paper, creating spaces where people would work and live and dream. This was prayer for him now. Not words, but design. Not supplication, but creation. Making the world more beautiful. One building at a time, honoring the gift of a second chance by using it fully. Before bed, Raymond walked down the hall to check on Caleb one more time. His son slept peacefully, small chest rising and falling with easy breaths. The science textbook on his nightstand was bookmarked at a chapter about architecture. Caleb had checked it out from the library, wanting to understand his father's work. Raymond felt his throat tighten with love. This child had been his reason for everything. His reason to quit. His reason to stay safe. His reason to avoid risk, and ultimately, his reason to try again. Because what kind of father taught his son that dreams expired? That talent had a statute of limitations? That fear was stronger than hope? Raymond returned to his own room, set his alarm, and lay in the darkness, thinking about fences and second chances, and the strange, wonderful ways life unfolded when you had the courage to let it. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, He dreamed of buildings rising from empty lots of structures that would stand for generations of a future he'd once thought was lost, but had found again. The dreams were good ones. The kind worth fighting for. The kind worth believing in. Especially when it seemed impossible. Because impossible was just another word for not yet. And not yet meant there was still time, still hope, still possibility waiting just on the other side of fear, if you were brave enough to reach for it. Raymond was finally brave enough. His son had taught him that a fence had shown him the way, and a woman who understood second chances had opened the door. The rest was up to him, and he would make it.